Welcome to Garden Views, interesting conversations with interesting people who have done and or are doing interesting things. So sit back and enjoy.
Welcome into Garden Views this week, and we are talking to PJ Blount. Like last week, we're also going into the laws of space again, but this is we're going a little bit further than we have before. So PJ is a legal lecturer. Some might call him a law professor, I suppose, on stateside, and he's at Cardiff University, which is in Wales. I only know that because of the Clash at Cardiff, the WWE event last year, the PLE event. But he is, and he's a Yank like myself, and like most of the audience, or a bunch of it, or at least went to uni here, university. You were a Rutgers grad, as I saw. So, PJ, thank you very much for being on the show, and do better with your introduction than I did.
No, thank you for having me. And I think you hit all the high points, and you even navigated all the Britishisms when it comes to universities. So good job.
Well, thank you for that. Excellent. All right. Well, good. I'll take all the praise I can get. So, I guess we should hear a little bit. I mean, your accent obviously is not British or Welsh. It's like mine. It's American, which I'm sure is as distinct to people in Wales and than it is, as theirs is to ours. But how did you make the trip from stateside to lecturing at Cardiff?
So I got my law degree at the University of Mississippi. And then after that, I came to London, actually, and did an LLM in international law, and I wrote on the topic of space law for a thesis, kind of because I thought it would be funny. But then, after that, a job opened back up at the University of Mississippi, which has a space law center there.
Sure.
And I thought, I've got a pretty good writing sample for that. Why not? So I applied and went back to Mississippi and taught, I was there full time for five more years, but ended up teaching, online at Mississippi for years and years after that. Went off to get a PhD at Rutgers, and then from there ended up at the University of Luxembourg. And post Luxembourg, I have come to Cardiff. So one of those just kind of bouncing around from place to place academics, I guess.
Okay, the roaming philosopher nobility is that what's happening here?
Yeah, but less nobility.
Okay, just an old-fashioned natural philosopher.
Yeah, we'll take that.
Okay, I assume that you worked with Professor Hanlon at some point.
No, so Michelle took over after I had left. I was still teaching online when she took over as one of the co-directors there. But I know her and obviously spent a little bit of time overlapping with her. But yeah, that was kind of after my old Miss Glory days.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, she's been on the show, so folks, if you want to hear another University of Mississippi space law expert, you can check that show out if you haven't already. If you have, go check it out again. And I am always trying to get her back on the show again, but who knows if eventually I'll be successful. So the topic that I've seen you speak on and write upon, and that's what we're going to probably focus mostly on, is it's a little bit forward thinking, which I think is necessary. In many of the shows, we talk about the problems. Some of them are here. Some of them are further away. Some of them may be closer than we think. But if humanity as a whole had this kind of foresight, or at least tried to address these issues beforehand, before certain things like, the European colonization of the Americas, or the British East India Company, or the Hudson Bay Company, or, any type of situation like that, we like to think that in our age of enlightenment, whether we really are isn't is a different question, that we could have avoided or mitigated certain disasters. So what am I dancing around? We're talking about settling in space, what is usually referred to these days as colonization. I guess the difference is that we don't know that there's anything alive out there, or at least sentient. We knew that there were people alive in the Americas and other places that were colonized as well. We dehumanized them, of course, or otherized them. So it is a little bit different. As far as we know, we don't know what we don't know. And yes, I'm sure we'd all like to believe that, that there's Andorrans and Polarians and, Orionists, and, they're all out there waiting. And then they may already be, out there in space. But as far as we know, it is mostly empty, with the exception of possibly, bacteria and other things. So, how do you address this? How do you research this? What's your starting point?
So my starting point, and I come at this as a lawyer, right? There's a whole technical end of this, and I've got to tell you, I'll be very honest, I'm a bit of a pessimist on the notion of us actually going out there and doing that. But that's much more based on, I think that the technical hurdles that have to be done are such that it's just an enormous amount of money, and I don't see where that comes from at any point in the near term. But that's just me generally being a pessimist about technology. But I come at the research from the point of a lawyer, right? What are the questions that we're going to have to answer as humans move off into space? And I wrote a chapter on this a bit ago, and I sort of broke it down into, well, in the near term, what's this going to look like? In the midterm, what's this going to look like? And then in the long term, what's this going to look like? And how does the law change from employees being sent off to live long term in space, all the way to this point way distant in the future, where a settlement becomes autonomous and says, we don't need you anymore, Earth. And what does that mean for not just those settlers, but for the investors that built that settlement?
So you've taken us from Outland to Alien to The Expanse.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So those of you who are not sci-fi geeks, Outland was a movie with Sean Connery, but basically he was the marshal. It was basically High Noon, but he was the marshal in a space mining colony station, I think on the moon. Alien, of course, was a mining ship, and of course they stumbled upon an alien or aliens, and it was a horror movie in space. And The Expanse is a fabulous science fiction series that was on Sci-Fi, then got picked up by Amazon. But there are colonies, and there's belters who are in the inner belt, and Mars broke away and is independent, and and there's all sorts of intrigue and politics going on. So that's sort of, if you didn't follow what I was talking about before, hopefully now you do. So, but I actually think that that's great, the way you did that. And aside from the technology, there's also, it's, whether you're a pessimist or optimist about the technology, our biology isn't meant to, go into space and be sustained. The radiation, the impact on our bones and muscles, and, none of that is really known. But I think for the purpose of the rest of the conversation, we probably should just take that out of the equation and go with what you've written on, with the presumptions that those biological, items are addressed.
So I will say that there's actually a line of research on this particular area. He's passed away now, but his name was George Robinson. He was actually GC for the Smithsonian at some point. But he was very interested in the notion of transhumanism and law. And so he brought these ideas together from this very philosophical standpoint of, what happens as we begin to change in space. And he wrote an article, it's probably 20, 25 years old now, about the notion of space kind, right?
Right.
As we go out into space, we cease to be human and we would become space kind. And what does that mean for, this notion of law, right? If law binds humans and it binds Earth kind, can we continue to impose this law on space kind after they have gone through essentially a physiological changes. And from there, like he actually went off into the world of sort of the biotechnical implications of essentially cyborgs. Moving out into space. So no, that's as far as the law goes, that's on the table.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. And we have the opposite also. And what I mean by that is there are groups that are actively trying to get personhood for certain types of what we consider animals that have sentience, whether it's a octopus or a whale or, a porpoise. And I'm not necessarily opposed to any of that, in theory anyway. And then you have basically the Magneto theory. We're homo superior. We're not subject to your laws. And he's actually arguing from a post-humanist that if cyborgs or robotic vessels, sleeves as they were called in the Altered Carbon series, or the soul or the intellect can be downloaded, which many science fiction and writers have pontificated with, from Neil Stephenson to William Gibson to Adrian Tchaikovsky, and I'm sure there's a billion others. Lex Luthor for sure has thought about it. Are post-humans or some sort of superhuman no longer human and not subject to the laws of Earth, which is even a second philosophical issue other than the plain old geography. Are people who are not within Earth's atmosphere subject to the laws of Earth?
Yeah, I mean, so George always came at this from a very natural law perspective. That was his grounding point, is that we have to find sort of these basic principles that we can apply across different species, right? And he very much talked about it in terms of interspecies relations. And he actually reached back into this other realm of scholarship, which is meta law, which was in the 60s. It was, what law, if we find aliens out there, what law is going to apply amongst us? And this one of the first space lawyers, Andrew G. Haley, put forward this notion of meta law, and he essentially adopted the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And at some point, I forget, it may have been Fassan or one of these other scholars came along and they're like, that's not right. What if they don't breathe air? You should do unto others as they would have you do unto them, sort of notion. And so I think I've forgotten your question at this point. I'm rambling, but there was this. So George kind of pulled from that to bring forward and think, well, once we change, right, what sorts of precepts can we take from meta law and apply those into sort of this notion of post-humans as they interact back with humans again? So I don't know if I answered the question or if it was a question.
No, it's fine, because we are getting into the very philosophical. There's no clear answer. Yours was sort of, are we something other than human, subject to the laws, period, if we meet aliens of some type of recognizable form? How do we approach it? And I guess the gentleman that you were citing indicated that some version of the golden rule, and someone else suggested a modification to it, which I guess was more flexible, but I think the idea is the same. I mean, don't do exactly what you would do unto others. Just try to treat them the way you would hope to be treated yourself, taking into account their condition. Now, of course, that would presume that you're meeting a species, a life form with basically an equal or lesser technological or power status. And of course, if we met one that was stronger, chances are, unless they're more enlightened, they would dictate the terms of that, which is what my friend Bruce Fenton pointed out. He said, we probably don't have a say in it, but I'll play along. But mine was even maybe less philosophical, but just as difficult, is, absent some enforcement mechanisms here, or basically the extortionists, the kidnappers hope that you still care about what you have on terra firma, on Earth, in a nation that can be impacted. Do the laws of Earth apply once you're no longer on Earth, or even, forget about its atmosphere, that you're out of its, out of its orbit, that you've gone, once you're at the moon, you're certainly not, I don't know where satellites end, but they end before Lagrange points generally. So, it was that, but I don't know that. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, actually, you spawned a couple of things. I'll tell a story real quick. Actually, so I saw this guy speak once, and he had used to work for NASA. I forget his name, but he was living in Hawaii. He had done work on the Tankiki that project. The let's see if we can actually rebuild one of these Polynesian ships. But he'd worked for NASA kind of under this umbrella of thinking about what life might be and what migration into space might be. And he's telling the story, and he says, look, I was there, and we just had interminable meetings. We had to go to all these meetings all the time. And so one day we're having this meeting where they're talking about all the different ways that we might treat extraterrestrial life if we meet it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he finally said that he just got fed up with it, and he looks up at everybody and goes, well, what if they want to kill us all?
Mm-hmm.
And he said he never got invited to another meeting after that. And it was perfect for him. But I don't know, as you were talking, I was like, I remember the story. But this notion of law extending out over people, I think that this connects back to that near term, midterm, and long term, right? Near term, you are going to be connected enough to Earth that law will be over you, right? Like if Elon Musk builds his Mars city, the first people that go there are going to be Elon Musk's employees. They're going to be under a contract. They're going to be dependent on resupply. Because, one of the things that we have to recognize about the notion of space settlement is there are not trees there. There are not animals to eat. There are not fish there to eat. There is a definite need for resupply. And so that connection back to Earth is going to, one, be necessary just for life, but it's going to be legally structured as well.
Mm-hmm.
It is, at some point, if that settlement can become autonomous, you can say it doesn't matter if you ever send another rocket ship here again, that's when the law can break down. And that's when we have thing in the chapter I wrote actually called it a post-colonial moment, right? Where the colony says, hey, we don't need you anymore. And I think that's actually the interesting part, right? What does that mean for Earth-space relations?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting to me. And I think for the purpose of this conversation, I think the audience is smart enough, if they're listening to Garden Views and listening to shows about, sort of esoteric space laws that haven't existed yet, that they know that when we say colonization, we don't mean the way it's used today, that this type of colonization is the old-fashioned term, whether it was used rightly or wrongly, where there's nothing else already there, or at least we don't think that there is, and that it's basically in an otherwise unlivable habitat, or at least with any life form that we are aware of. And let's assume that there's no ghosts of Mars, or silicon-based creatures that we couldn't, live on eating sand or whatever.
I don't know. We assume that there are ghosts of Mars. That kind of sounds fun.
We cannot on Garden of Doom. On Garden Views, we probably shouldn't. But unless you wrote about the legal ethics of dealing with the ghosts of Mars, because ghost and non-personhood. That's
out of scope for that chapter.
Yeah, I would think that'd be a couple steps beyond what even the brain can process. You've got out of Earth's sphere, you've got another planet, you've got independent colony, then you've got a ghost that's like a some sort of extra dimensional being to begin. Doesn't even belong. Is it even a ghost of Mars?
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Wow.
When I was doing the research for this, I did, there are a lot of ethical, there's a lot of ethical scholarship on this. I actually found a bit more than I found in sort of the legal end. And one of the ethical problems that got put forward is, do we owe a duty to that planet, to that environment itself, which is not necessarily about finding life there. It's this sort of deeper question about, we often talk about dead planets, right? Mars is a dead planet. But that sort of, it presupposes our notion of life. And so a lot of these ethicists, question whether or not we owe a duty to that environment in some way, shape, or form, which I think kind of pivots us back towards critiquing that notion of colonization and critiquing this idea that it's still us going out there and doing what we want with a place that is different from us, and we're basing it in this notion that it's terra nullius, from the legal perspective. But when we've done that in the past, it has tended to not be terra nullius. And I mean, I think that there are all sorts of different ways that you can go about this. But I think it's interesting to just kind of note that the critique of colonization is one. I mean, this is the reason we use the word settlement, is because it's so loaded at this point that it almost defeats any conversation before you dive into it.
Fair enough. I'm okay with the word settlement as well. You use colony, and then, until 10 years ago, you could use it with the context of space and not have that. But that, I'm not here to have an ethical debate over the word colony. I'm perfectly fine with settlement, and also with the assumption that it is empty land. And you are correct. The empty land was absolutely part of theories in many a country, and oftentimes it was BS, knowingly BS. This maybe isn't, unless you believe certain conspiracy theories, but I don't want to get into that. I think that it's not a bad idea to try to look at everything as a habitat to be preserved. I mean, I believe we look at Antarctica that way, but if you treated everything the way sort of like UNESCO World Heritage sites are supposed to be cared for, then that maybe is at least an aspirational goal, to try to be gently and reduce the footprint. I mean, the settlement, the goal is probably 1, scientific, 2, economic. To fool ourselves that it's going to be one or the other is probably foolish. Even if there is no economic benefit, discovery usually leads to something, whether it's mining or a new mineral or an element that doesn't occur on Earth or whatever it is. But as a human race, we don't generally go to other places and not find a way to stay there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when it comes to the notion of the preservation of the environment, just looking at Mars, right? That's the most likely one that we're to get to next, right? It's one of these questions of well, what do we want to achieve by preserving it? And I think that the primary thing is, well, from a science perspective, we want to have this investigation as to whether or not there's been life there before. And as soon as we begin to go and put our life there, then it's compromised, right? Just It's sort of like a forensic thing, right? You've messed up the crime scene sort of issue. And I think that is sort of the big concern from the science community is, right? And this is where the planetary protection stuff comes in, right? If you don't sterilize your spacecraft and you send it to Mars, and you put bacteria all over Mars, and then the next spacecraft goes there and discovers that bacteria, well, now we're in a false positive that we're going to be unraveling for years and years and years and years. And so I think that's the concern. I think it would be a very difficult thing to say, no, we should never go to Mars and we have to leave it alone because it is as it is, and that just that sort of negates the idea that change happens, right? I mean, this almost links into this ongoing debate that we have in society where we use the word natural. It's like, it's natural. Well, what does that mean, right?
Right.
Well, Mars is natural, but it changes. It changes all the time, and it might change from a human endeavor there. And so I think that it's striking that balance between making sure that we get the science that we want out of it, because look, there are probably some very important discoveries to be made there. At the same time, at some point the scales will tip in terms of, well, people are there now and people are going to do things. Now, I personally think that's way off in the future, but yeah.
Okay. Well, luckily, I happen to know somebody who wrote on this and wrote near term, midterm, and long term. So, I guess probably the best thing to do is to follow your writings. And so, I guess we probably covered a bit of the near term, but maybe just do a synopsis or over arching statement of the near term, and then take us into the midterm.
Yeah, I think in the near term, the question is one of contract law. I mean, it's essentially, how do you treat these people that are going to be employees? They are going to, you know, and we'll just focus on Mars, right? You send somebody to Mars, they are there for 2 years, waiting for another ship to come back. What happens if you fire them? What obligations do you owe them? How do you work this out in contract? And I think that's the very near term thing. I don't think we're in a place where we see in the near term, people that aren't employees or aren't contractually saying, "Hey, I want to go there and do this as because I'm a billionaire and I've got a lot of money." We're not seeing those people go yet. We're not seeing families go because the father's working there, the mother's working there. That is not what we're seeing. So I think that's a question about contract law and what duties we owe to employees, essentially.
Right. Yeah, I think that probably it's going to be sort of like oil derrick workers in international waters, or
exactly like that.
Ice truckers. Think about the most dangerous sort of union type of jobs where they'll have to be, I would imagine, extraordinarily liberal, or completely no fault, no exceptions workers' comp law, and probably, I would imagine, an enormous life insurance policy built into this, for the enormous risks and sacrifice that these folks are taking. But then again, the free market tends to say, if you offer people, the Earth equivalent of $120,000 a year and they were making $57,000 a year, some people are going to jump at it. So, I don't want to get into the libertarian or the economic things of that, but I think it would be it's going to be less your scientific researcher rate at McMurtry or McMurdo Station, Antarctica, and more your ice trucker, international water, very dangerous, kind of hazardous pay work kind of thing. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you'll be like, it'll be boring things like insurance and reinsurance and secondary insurance and HR issues. Like you said, what if somebody violates their contract, but they're still there? I mean, whose law apply? Is it the vessel that, the ship is flagged to, or is it like the damage in space where it's the state that launched it, which doesn't have to be the flag country? So I don't know what. Yeah.
I mean, I think an example that I've used recently is that because, and I'm trying to pick on Musk, but I often do. Right? Sure. He wants to do a Mars city. Let's say you have a Musk employee in a Martian city who tweets something mean about him, right? Like,
right.
This is your contract nightmare, right? Because he's going to fire that guy, but he's supposed to keep that person alive.
Right. Yeah, or a criminal, somebody who does something criminal. Who's the law enforcement, and what's the due process, and how does that get enforced? And if it is your employee that commits the crime, are they still getting paid because or is that just considered part of their jail sentence, waiting in a brig for 14 months before the transport ship comes?
I mean, and we do have a little precedence for this. If you're on the ISS, criminal law applies, and they've actually set out a jurisdictional structure for the ISS. So it depends on what module you're on when you break the law as to what law applies to it. And there's a command authority on the ISS, and so that they have thought about this sort of notion. Now, of course, these are government astronauts. It's a little different in that respect, but there is precedent for this sort of thing being carried out, and so that becomes a question of whether or not you put that structure in place before you begin to send people. And governments tend to be better about this than than private companies.
What is the word when we say interweaving? Well, we'll just use interweaving instead of you trying to guess what word was in my head. But there's going to be an interweaving and overlapping web of laws and stuff that's going to cause headaches and boredom for a layperson. But lawyers and the business leaders and the banks and the insurance companies and everyone, they're going to be very much involved in it. But let's presume that they can work something like that out. Let's just say that everything is the employer's got to pay for it no matter what. It's just if there's going to be a penalty, that gets adjudicated when you bring the misbehaving person back to earth. And we can get past all the HR and labor law issues, that there's some scheme that can be agreed upon. So what then happens? I guess, what is, have we completed the near term, or what's the next issue with the near term, or are we into the midterm?
I think that's the bulk of the near term. I'm gonna cop to you that I probably should have gone back and reread my chapter before this, but yeah, I think that's the near term.
It's all right, no one's listening. Don't worry. No one will hear this.
Yeah, that's always the hope.
Yeah, sure. That's the goal of all podcasters, is to talk to nobody.
Well, I mean, that's the hope for the guest. The podcaster has different hopes and aspirations.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So I should have run this conflict of interest by you earlier in pre-production, but yeah. All right. So midterm. What are these issues that you allegedly remember?
Well, so this is the part, is I've been kind of drawing out the near term, because I've been trying to remember what I pitched as the midterm questions. So I'm kind of going to riff here and think on this, because I don't remember exactly what I wrote. But I think that in the midterm we begin to have these broader questions about individuals that become resident in space and don't have an intent to come back. Mm-hmm. That they are there. Now, they might still be connected via resupply and a necessity for resupply, but at this point we could have gotten that resupply chain down in such a way that it is possible to go be in space and to live and die in space. Right. At which point we have a very different question, right? This is no longer contract law. We're beginning to look a bit more like municipal law, right? You've got to essentially function like a city, not necessarily a state or a government like at that level, but you've got to supply, basic services throughout that. You've got to be ready to do, those types of things. You have to deal with the fact that people are going to get married, that maybe babies will be had, that deaths will happen, and those, I think, are your midterm. Is how do we then begin to grow from being contract law and being employees into being more autonomous individuals? Right,
domiciled residents, citizens. I mean, the first thing I thought about was passports. Like, what passport are you under? What country are you a resident of, if any? Can you vote, if your country is a democracy, all of these things. But I mean, as far as the basic services, I mean, ironically, that's the one we do have blueprints for. We have basically private cities. Disney World is basically a private city. There's plenty of new developments in every suburb in the United States where there's a homeowners association and a developer who says, we will form the homeowners association. We will build the sewers. We will build the roads. We will install the fire hydrants. We will pay for, X amount for the fire coverage and the EMT and the extra police coverage. And they sort of figure it out. I guess the only difference here is you can't build upon the existing municipalities, fire department, police department, medical services. You have to build those also. But Disney did that. I mean, they have their own fire department.
So I think it's similar to that, but I think there are some differences, right? Okay. And one of the differences is that municipality also then becomes the guarantor of rights. And they become the guarantor of rights in a very dangerous place. Mm-hmm. Right? So, like, if we're talking about a Martian city in the term, right, you're still very much dependent on not being outside, right?
Absolutely.
I'm going to assume that we haven't terraformed and built an atmosphere there. And so you become a city that is providing these things, essentially. But at the same time, this is very much wrapped in a harsh environment that will kill you. And so I think that changes how the whatever governmental structure you have there interacts with you vis-a-vis your rights. And so, maybe dissent, right? Maybe this notion of free speech, which you certainly have in Disney's little city, but that's because you are in the United States, right? And so you were able to rely on the Constitution. The question of how those rights are going to play out in a Martian city where dissent could lead to unrest, which could lead to a breach of the hull, which could lead to everybody being dead, right? And so It's these types of questions that I think turn into midterm questions.
I agree. And maybe the analogy is closer to a military base where there's lesser rights there, but probably even more constricted by contract and some sort of public-private partnership. But to be simple, you're not entitled to life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness. You're entitled to be compensated very well. Your family will get a lot of money if something bad happens to you, and you're entitled to us to do the best we can to keep you alive. But you're assuming a heck of a lot of the risks to do this, and you're not pursuing your own happiness necessarily. Maybe you'll find it, but you're going to be making enough money that will be sent home or be provided home that your wife and kids and grandkids, are going to form some sort of generational wealth or comfort zone. And, I guess you'd have to waive certain rights or assume certain risks again in that contract, in this collective bargaining agreement, which is more grand scope than your typical collective bargaining agreement, at least the American style.
Yeah, and I mean, I would actually say that the military base is an interesting analogy. I mean, I think that one of the things that we have to accept is that early on, right, these are most likely going to be sort of mixed public-private type things, right? If you look at the plan for Artemis, right, the government's going to go, but the notion is that we'll have this lunar economy that flows on with that, meaning that commercial will follow, maybe lead, we're not sure, right? It's the government's going to go and be the customer, but the commercial entities are going to follow on. And I think that turns it into, a very sort of interesting situation for living. I love a good story. I was in Luxembourg once, and one of the space companies, I won't say which one, was running out their dog and pony show, and they had this whole lunar city thing that they were doing. And space companies love a good animated video thing that they put out in front of you. And so I was at this like space cafe thing, and they're playing this, and they're talking about how wonderful it's going to be. And I had a student sitting next to me, and I looked at it and pointed up, and I was like, "Where do you think the drug dealers in that city live?" And they were like, "What?" And I was like, "It's a city. They're going to be drug dealers. Where do you think they live?" And I think that those are the types of things that you're going to think about, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get a population that's big enough there, smuggling happens. These things are going to be there. You have to have some sort of law enforcement. You have to have a question about what rights are owed to people. And all of that becomes very sticky in a very harsh environment.
It's Deadwood. I mean, the show Deadwood. I mean, you have the people going into, what they consider terra nullius, although they know that there's native peoples there, but they don't care because they're going to, kill them. And we know there are different levels of, personhood there, but, there's people there working, and with that comes the saloons, the casinos, the prostitutes, and everything else, and the opium dealer and all of that. And you're absolutely right that's going to be part of it. There's other things too. I mean, there'd probably be, I would think there'd be some right to a free press, maybe not unlimited, probably tighter type of national security equivalents, but freedom of religion. Like if you're an Orthodox Jew and you have to, take a day off. I mean, first of all, is it the Earth Day, Friday night to Saturday night, or is it the Mars Day, which is different? Or is it like, nope, everybody here is on duty 24/7, 365. If you're a devout Muslim, how do you pray 5 times to Mecca? I mean, that's going to be probably impossible in sometimes. So listen, I know that not every Jew or Muslim is that kind of devout, but if you were, what happens here is somebody's going to sue the ground-based company for violating their civil rights, that they can't get this high-paying job that guarantees their family money, and these issues are going to have to be dealt with regardless of contract, just because someone rightly is going to, or interestingly is going to bring it up as and it's no longer a thought experiment.
Yeah, although on the ISS they did figure out the how you face Mecca from the ISS. I forget how they figured it out, but there's a way to do it.
I guess you'd be going through 3D through the Earth, I suppose.
I guess so. I mean, I'm not a physicist. I'm just a lowly lawyer. But I don't understand geography. But no, I mean, these are the types of issues, and I think that it turns from this contractual issue into one of rights, and what rights do you have, and what rights you can claim, and also then who you claim them from, right? Mm-hmm. Do you claim them from this municipal authority? Do you have the ability to come and claim them in a judicial court? And that probably, a judicial court, a terrestrial court. It's late here, and so I think it's one of those questions that will be wrapped up in contract. It will be wrapped up in whoever is the creator of this entity. And I think that one of the major questions is going to be, well, is this a government entity? Is this a commercial entity? Or is it a mix? Is it this Moon Village type situation where it could be any number of different entities that are all just building their stuff in the same place?
Yeah, that's a good question. At one point, no matter what it starts out as, it does become a government, but a government doesn't have to be public. It can be private. That's just sort of anathema to our way of thinking. But you can have a private contract community. I mean, you sort of do it every time you go to an all-inclusive resort, but not exactly.
The danger. Maybe I don't know the danger, but the issue is that does it become the company store then? Where you're constantly indebted to the company, and it essentially traps you there. And so that's the other danger. And all of these, this isn't anything new, right? We've done this over and over in history. It's just new because when you walk out the door and you say, I'm not going to do this anymore, and you walk out the door, you suffocate immediately.
Right. Right. It's not just the ocean, which I understand was extremely perilous, but it's not the same. Everything there, it's not like you're in the desert where everything is trying to kill, or the jungle where everything's trying to kill you. It's that there's nothing there to support life. It's not that anything's trying to kill you. It's just that it's unlivable. Which is a different level of dependence. And you're right. It's the company store for everything. You want to lodge a protest? Okay, well, maybe you're just not going to get any vegetables. Maybe you'll only get potatoes for 6 weeks. If you're lucky, then you get scurvy, and it's easy to manufacture an illness when you're entirely dependent on a third party for all your sources of nutrition and hydration. But yeah, so those are very interesting midterm. So. What are the long term? Because this is where I'm sure we're going to get even more far.
Yeah, I think the long term is established autonomy. You don't need resupply. You don't need those rockets to come back. And at that point, you have the ability to say, we're independent. Mm-hmm. We don't need you anymore. And this leads to, I think, all sorts of questions, right? Well, what about those investors that built that lovely city that's around you that you are now using? Do you owe them something because you are now claiming independence? I think that's just almost a threshold question, because the next one is, well, then what does this mean in terms of international law or international relations? Are we suddenly in a place of interplanetary relations? Can the system of international law that attempts to maintain peace and security amongst states, can it then be extended and apply to this, pseudo state that's on a planet somewhere else? Would they even want that? Would they want to be a part of that sort of governance system? And so I think that, I'm pretty sure in the article I called this a post-colonial moment, not in the sense of the colony breaking away, not necessarily trying to get into the colony thing again, but it's that notion of there comes a moment when, the people say, we don't need you anymore. Right. We have our own thing going here, and we don't want your legal system. We don't want your law. We have our own law. But that causes a ripple effect back down to earth, because now what duties do we owe them as Earth to Mars? And two, what about people that paid for that? Mm-hmm. Presumably they've gotten paid back at this point. They've terraformed and can live there without any help. But I think that I think these are fascinating questions.
I mean, have they?
What do we think about that?
If people built, dozens and dozens or scores and scores, thousands and thousands of greenhouses to grow things and labs to, grow artificial, meat from cells. And that's what they did first because they agreed to it. They could reach independence before an investor got any return on their investment. So if you're the investors controlling, you're like, you're not, you're limited to one greenhouse, for science or whatever the case may be. And you're going to have like Pinkertons up there to sort of bust, people trying to build a life. I mean, I
gotta say that I think though it's more than just greenhouses, right? Because if you haven't created an atmosphere, you have to have some sort of manufacturing ability. You have to be able to extract resources to make things, to just repair things, right? Like you can't maintain these buildings indefinitely into the future without having those types of capabilities. And so I think there is, like, just for autonomy, there's a lot that has to happen there.
Sure. I agree. I mean, but you have to, you're going to have to build you have to find water, food, shelter, first. Those are going to be the first things. And, I'm assuming that the money comes from mining of some sort of extraction of resources and sending them back. I suppose there could be some scientific, discovery that you just send back the formula, the results, or the how to do it. But if you're going with the mining, that probably comes after the basics. And I guess then it's just a race as to whether the people there decide to break away first and start building other stuff. I don't know. I mean, it's probably too hard to do it independently, and somebody would have to plan exactly what the contractors, the construction part of it, what they're building, and I guess the types of materials they get. It's going to be math. It's going to be math and engineering. You are building the infrastructure for economic return at the same time you're building these basic services and self-autonomy sustenance at such a level that the community, the settlement, the colony, whatever we want to call it, can never reach independence before the investors get their money back or the taxpayers get their money back, or some combination, which is what it probably will be. I mean, we already see that, SpaceX's biggest client is NASA. So, it's already...
It'll be a different kind of space company, though. A different kind of space company.
Sure. It'll be Blue Origins or Jeff's Horizons.
No, when SpaceX started, that was their pitch, right?
Oh, was it?
They weren't going to be a government contractor. They weren't Lockheed Martin. They weren't, they were going to be different. And then, obviously, you can't ignore the biggest customer.
Well, yeah.
You can't ignore the person, the entity that is buying the most space technology.
Right.
Sorry,
that's a good insider joke. I mean, the interesting thing is, I guess if you're pretty much the only space company, I mean, definitionally, you're different. I mean, you said we're going to be a different space company. I don't know if they said we're going to be different from every other kind of industry. So a little lawyer loophole there, maybe in the marketing. Okay, so yeah, this is there's tons and tons of issues, and I think the one thing human experience has taught us is that there's not enough planning it's not possible to do enough planning in advance, that things move faster than the planning will be, and somebody will call us liberal or not practical, or whatever it is. But so how can we, because we're thinking about this decades, if not a century or more than a century away from making much of this possible, how do we impact build the framework, the groundwork now, so that when those days come, we know that we've done the best to not repeat the mistakes of the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to be actually impactful in this, part of it is about those initial contracts. It's about thinking about the humanity in space exploration, and thinking about how, if we are going to send individuals off as employees or government astronauts to live and work in space, we need to make sure that humanity is written into that contract, and that is not just purely, exploitative, for lack of a better word, power agreement, that it is one that recognizes that these are people that are putting their lives in danger. And I certainly think that we can do that, right? That's not something that is, not done on Earth, right? We do that in contracts on Earth. And so I think that's an important part. Thinking into that mid and far term, long term.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, again, it's late.
Yeah, right.
Thinking into that, I think it's one about really, being well versed in sort of political philosophy and thinking about all the different ways in which this plays out, but also recognizing that you slip into the midterm from the near term and you don't really realize it. And you slip in from the midterm into the long term without really realizing, right? It's the proverbial frog in boiling water sort of thing. And so it's one about, constantly paying attention to what is going on now, so that you're laying the groundwork for the future to be a little better.
Right.
And so I would say that to be impactful, from a legal perspective, it's about ensuring that, you send somebody off into space to work, that you have a strong agreement with them that recognizes their rights, the obligations that you have to them as a human being.
Well, it might have to be that the players, as we identify them at the time, have to sign on to some sort of labor contract with that type of workers' comp and life insurance, and municipality building obligations, but also there might need to be some sort of new business created that's required, sort of like a human rights bond, where the companies have to post a $500 billion bond each to guarantee payment, so that if they violate it, this giant insurance entity, bonding company, is going after the giant SpaceX, as opposed to Johnny Thomas, who died in space, and whose family who didn't get paid and is trying to fight SpaceX or Jeff Zikistan. Let's call Jeff Zikistan. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, those
Yeah, I mean, look, there's going to be risk, right? It's going to be a thing. People are going to die.
Right.
That it's about ensuring that they didn't just go up there and die and nothing came of it, right? That they went there for hazard pay, and they went there for that hazard pay probably for a family, and you need to ensure that gets there. At the same time, right, there does need to be some recognition that risk is being undertaken. I mean, so in the U.S., we have this notion of informed consent for space tourists, right? You're going to go and ride on Jeff Bezos' rocket. You need to sign something that says that you understand that you can be maimed and killed. In the UK, they actually took that a step further. If you're going to go work at a launch site, you sign an informed consent that says you understand that you're working next to a giant missile that can blow up and burn you to death.
Absolutely.
And so, part of your compensation becomes, you lose your right to sue, but there is compensation in your contract about, this is what happens if there's a disaster. This is the payout that your estate gets. And it's that sort of thing that needs to be kind of in there and thought about. But I also think that there's a notion that we need to begin to, just think about rights. Think about this notion of, what human rights are workers going to have in space, and think about ways that those can be enabled in contracts.
And what we've sort of sidestepped in this I think we've been very detailed in a short amount of time. But what's been given short shrift the last 20 minutes or so? The actual environment, Mars itself. So you could see how even when we're trying to think about all sorts of things, we're thinking about the human things, obviously, and now we've forgotten about the UNESCO World Heritage Site, how to treat the actual land, and if we're going to consider it like pristine land that needs to be protected, sort of like Antarctica, or we're going to say, we're not going to worry about that now because our footprint is going to be so small for the next 200 years. We'll kick that down the can. And by the way, it's a whole planet. So it's going to take a long time for us to, build up microplastics or pollute it, which, is short-sighted, but is also tempting at the same time. It's also easy and probably true to an extent.
Yeah. I mean, I you're right. We ignored all of that, and we had sort of talked about it at the beginning, but it is this other question, and I think that one of the things that when we go down this settlement route, we almost always immediately forget about the environmental part, because It's easy to. You begin to think about that city. You begin to think about, well, how do we keep people alive, and we forget about this notion that, well, maybe we owe a duty to the landscape, I think the problem is it's harder to conceptualize those rights, right? It's
right.
Easy to kind of look out at a national park and go, that's nice, I'm glad we have it, it's beautiful, we should preserve nature. I think it's a lot harder to say, yeah, we should preserve Mars. All of Mars?
Right.
Most of Mars? What do we preserve there?
It's different when you've got the pyramids of Giza, and and I know there's people say that there's a pyramid on Mars, and maybe there is, and that would change the whole thing. But let's assume for now it's.
We should have that. That should be a UNESCO site if they find that.
Right. Yeah. If they do find that.
I'll go on record on that one.
Okay, but for now, we are presuming that was just a trick of the light or whatnot.
Yeah.
So it is, terra nullius, no man's land, empty land. And if there was any history, I think some people estimated, again, using Earth-based life in the Goldilocks zone as the test. But if there was any life, it would have been like 400 million years ago or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that from a scientific perspective, I don't think there's an active notion that we're going to find live bacteria on there. I think the notion is that we might find, something from the past, some preservation of some life there, and that we don't want to screw that up, right?
Right.
The moon is shot, right? We've put enough stuff up there that we're never going to have a clear picture of what we find up there. But we haven't lost that with Mars. But, at some point you can't go on protecting it for forever from that.
Right.
At the same time, I'll go back to my pessimism. I don't think we're anywhere close to sending people to Mars. I don't think that we have overcome just the basic human factors of what it takes to get a person to Mars and not give them cancer.
Yeah, and their bones and muscles degrading as well. But well, maybe that's not pessimism. Maybe that's optimism. Maybe we should stop thinking that we've got an escape route into space, and look at this planet and try to figure stuff up. But that is definitely outside of my realm. I mean, this is outside of my realm, and I think it's probably even for people like yourself that it's inside your realm. It's so big. It's so, complicated. There's so many, moving parts and so many players that, it would require, like some sort of congressional, constitutional convention to try to, figure this out, even adequately. But I really do appreciate your taking the time on this. It's so complex, but I enjoy the hell out of these kinds of discussions, and I'm sort of at ease a little bit that it is, probably so far away that there's really nothing really to worry about right now. But were there any like sort of parting thoughts or summations that you want to give before you tell people how to find and follow you if you want to be found and followed?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll just kind of riff on the last thing that you said about this notion that it's good to think about it and that it's way off and we don't have to deal with it exactly right now. Because this is sort of a side research chain for me. Most of my stuff is space security. I do a lot in the realm of space security, which is a lot more immediate these days. And so it's always nice to kind of take the sidestep and think about, cities on Mars. Let's be philosophical for a little bit. That'll be fun, and you don't have to necessarily think about the threat of nuclear war in space, which is not as fun as one might think.
Yeah, I would think that it's not fun at all. I guess the only advantage is that it's not in a city on Earth, but yeah. It's true. All right, but yeah, no, space security is definitely something we talked about with Charlie Bennett. So those who didn't hear that show, listen to that because we did talk about the dual use issue. And yeah, maybe you'll be kind enough, and we'll come back to you in a few weeks or a few months or something, and talk about space security in its way. Oh, great, all right, terrific. I love when people say yes. All right. So if you want to be followed or found, how can people follow or find you? Or if you don't want to be followed and found, that's fine. Say, leave me alone.
Oh, no. Follow and find me. You'll find me on LinkedIn as PJ Blount. That's a pretty easy one. I'm on Twitter or X or whatever it is now as @Blunt's Folly. And so you can find me there. It's random stuff, so don't expect a lot of this content on Twitter. And I will note, since I'm doing pluggables, that literally yesterday, Oxford University Press just released a co-edited volume that I did with Sadia Pekkanen at the University of Washington, and it's the Oxford Handbook on Space Security. And so, go out, illegally download it and cite me off. That's my request.
Okay. Well, thank you again, PJ Blount. That is @Blunt's Folly. Blount is BLOUNT. So thanks again for joining us. And folks, thanks for listening in. Hope you found this informative. If you are kind enough, after you follow PJ, you can follow me @IcarusFellMD on X. You can also give this show 5 stars and a nice review, and subscribe, of course. And, if you're so kind, tell your friends, because personal referrals probably is more important than anything else, but all the other stuff really helps with the algorithm. Other than that, thanks once again to our guest. Enjoy Wales and Cardiff and all that it offers. And folks, you will hear from us again, certainly next week in the Garden of Doom, and within the next, few weeks in Garden Views. So thank you.
If you want to close your eyes, you might feel free, but just know that in the night they are coming for me. I'll collect my breath but can't get the concept of death, but I know that I'll get there. Everybody has a thought that they'll survive, but the truth is that I really doubt you're right. If they get you, then just trust that they'll hug you tighter and tighter until the lights go out. Ruin, I cannot believe that I am stuck in this ruin. I can barely breathe, I feel like I might just lose it. If you are coming out, then come on, just do it. Hide it in this way, I'm in ruin. If you wanna run away, well, play it safe, but I doubt you'll make it out here in this place. I know you will scream and shout, are you okay? But I know that you're not. We can run or we can hide, scared for my life. Tiptoe through the corridor, no wind inside. I just wanna go on home, no hope. I know that it's over. Ruin, I cannot believe that I am stuck in this ruin. I can barely breathe, I feel like I might just lose it. If you are coming out, then come on, just do it. Hide it in this I'm in ruin. Yeah. Giving up slowly, giving up, giving up, giving up, I'm gonna die. Giving up slowly, giving up, giving up, giving up, nothing's alright. Giving up slowly, why do I try? Why? Ruin, I cannot believe that I am stuck in this ruin. I can barely breathe, I feel like I might just lose it. If you are coming out, then come on, just do it. How did